Hello and welcome to Dialogue. As the most important bilateral relationship in the 21st century, China-U.S. relations are closely connected to the security, peace, and prosperity of the entire world. Graham Allison, the originator of the Thucydides trap theory, has warned the two countries could fall into a dangerous relationship and even conflict, which could undermine future global peace and security. A new book titled Escaping the Thucydides Trap has been written by Wang Huiyao, the chairman of the Center for China and Globalization. Can China and the United States avoid such a trap? And is it possible for China and the U.S. to forge a new strategic relationship in which the two countries are able to compete and cooperate at the same time? We are happy to have the chance to speak to both Professor Allison and Dr. Wang. Join us for today's discussion. I'm Xu Qinduo. Professor Allison, I think this idea of Thucydides trap has been so popular that when people talk about China-U.S. relationship, it's a framework, it's a background to talk about that. Still, what's exactly the trap? And I know I asked the question because there are misunderstandings about the concept here.
So this is a big idea that Thucydides had. As he wrote, it was the rise of Athens, this is in classical Greece, 2,500 years ago, the rapid rise of Athens and the impact that this had on Sparta, which was the ruling power, that made the war almost inevitable. So Thucydides trap is a term I coined to make vivid Thucydides' big idea. And the idea is that when a rapidly rising power seriously threatens to displace a major ruling power, you get a great disruption. And the result of that great disruption is most often war. So in the last 500 years, 16 times a rapidly rising power seriously threatened to displace a major ruling power. In 12 of those cases, the outcome was war. In 4 of the cases, the outcome was not war. So as President Xi Jinping often insists, the idea of Thucydides trap as inevitably meaning war, mistake, not inevitable. Actually, 4 of the 16 cases in the last 500 years, no war. Thucydides, when he's writing the book, says, I'm writing this book not to be fatalistic, not to say, well, our fate is in the hand of the gods, we'll just let happen what happened, but in order that we learn lessons from mistakes that are made in this case, so that future statesmen will be able to manage relations like this without war. So my objective in Destined for War was just exactly to do what Henry in this book has pushed us a step forward, to say this helps us see the magnitude of the challenge, which then should motivate an absolutely surge of imagination and statecraft to try to avoid the war that would become the natural outcome of a Thucydidean rivalry if we settle for history as usual.
So is that what prompted you, Dr. Wang, to write such a book, to try to find out, what are the means, probably, what it takes to avoid such a trap?
I think that what proposed by Graham, this concept, is really to warn people. We have to be careful. We are living in a different world now, and we should be extremely careful. I mean, particularly I got the inspiration when I had a dialogue with Graham. He was saying, China and U.S. is like conjoined twins. We cannot separate. But if we go to the, hot war, if we go to the nuclear war, Boston is gone and Beijing is gone, Washington is gone. That's terrible.
What's that point?
Yeah. So we're getting back to the Stone Age. So I think, there are many people still needs to, after 5 years of Graham proposed this concept, I think it's time to upgrade. And I had a serious dialogue with Professor Graham, and I think it's probably the best time to propose this new book to really tell how to escape it, how to avoid it, how to get out of it. what are the new latest development? What are the situations we have to confront, and what are cooperative, and also in the competition area, how we can really better manage our relations. So that's really the purpose, to get latest thinking on this topic, and also to raise the people's attention to avoid Thucydides trap.
Mm-hmm. Well, following up on that, over the past years, I know you first proposed the idea is in 2012, more than 10 years ago, and then 2017, the book based on the idea. So many years have been gone, and I wonder, are you getting more worried or less concerned about the prospect of China and the U.S. falling into Thucydides trap?
Each year since that book was published, Klaus Schwab, the guy that organizes Davos, as in one of these dialogues, asked me the question, okay, so what would Thucydides say now? And I unfortunately said each year, including in January, that I'm afraid he would say both parties are right on script, almost as if each is trying to show which can better exemplify the role of the rising power or the ruling power, accelerating towards what he expects would be the grandest collision of all times, sort of sitting on the edge of his chair. So I would say, unfortunately, we're more at risk today than we were then.
Dr. Wang, do you agree? I know like 2012, the relationship was okay, right? 2017, still okay, I would say. 2018, the trade war between the two countries, and then we have, of course, the new administration, Biden administration. His administration has been deepening some of the policies against China there. Still last year, they had a summit between President Xi and President Biden. Many people would say now we have a more or less stabilized relationship. What do you make of that? Can we say now we can rest assured, we are stable now, the relationship?
No, I think you're right. I mean, there's this concept of course, Graham Allison has discovered, for quite some time. But the world certainly got more competitive, more rivalry, and more dangerous than before. We are actually having war going on now in continental Europe and in the Middle East now. Asia is probably the only continent that haven't got a war yet, but we're but we're also very dangerously in a situation. But on the other hand, I also think politicians and policymakers also realize we are in a contemporary world, 21st century. We are in a nuclear age. We are mutually assured of destructions, and also we have just gone through the pandemic, where there's no cooperation, and then we have millions deaths, casualties, many worldwide, and of course now we're facing the climate. It's an imminent threat now. We have to really put our acts together. And then also Graham Allison had wrote a new article with late Dr. Henry Kissinger on warning on AI. If we don't collaborate on that, human being may be wiped out by AIs, if we are not careful. So circumstances today also has to think twice for the survival of each other, because we probably all live in the same boat, the global villagers. We're in the same village, we're in the same global boat. So if we can't think about we threw it out, we survived. We sink and float together. So I would say, even though the risk gets larger, but awareness of preventing this risk is also getting larger. And that's exactly this book about, is to really alert people that we have to be extremely careful, and we're not small matters. We're conjoined, the twins of each other. We cannot strangle each other to death because we're going to hurt ourselves. So that mutual assurance is really more present today than 10 years ago.
Mm-hmm. Professor, here, rhetoric aside, it's a policy, and also from the Chinese point of view, many people ask, what is the ultimate goal of the U.S. vis-a-vis its China relationship? For example, U.S. would say, okay, this is competition, zero sum. Let's assume it's zero sum, and we must win. China must be defeated. But how do you define a win? What is it like?
Well, a good question. We should have a competitive coexistence in which each of the societies tries to demonstrate how its political system can better deliver what citizens want. And the Americans have a view that an open democracy of an American style will ultimately be more successful in producing a successful society, successful people, and producing what people want. And Xi Jinping and the party believes that a party-led government of the sort that China has will be better able to provide order and the economic development and sufficient security to provide what people want. And if that rivalry peacefully plays out over 10, 20, 30, 40 years, maybe the U.S. government will change in some ways. Maybe the Chinese government will change in some ways. Maybe the U.S., I would say you'll hear a lot of rhetoric during this campaign about the fact that if my opponent is elected, this is the end of American democracy. The country will be, never maybe it could. I don't believe such a thing could happen, but the answer, we did have a civil war once before. So the answer is, who knows? And I would say in the Kissinger show and lie conversations that began what became the opening to China 50 years ago, one of the lines that both of them used from time to time is, so let history decide. So if the US and China are fierce rivals, but manage their cooperation sufficiently to allow a long-term rivalry, well, the world may learn a new system for governing, or the societies may learn a new system for governing. So I think it's unclear where the outcome is, except that they should each understand that coexisting is necessary, because the existence, the alternative, is co-destructing. And if they co-destruct, they will not continue this experiment, yes.
From the US side, there's this worry, anxiety, sometimes even fear. The rapid rise of China could displace the US, could replace the US to become, the superpower, the only power, things like that. What is the ultimate goal of the Chinese development? Is there an ambition from the Chinese side to replace the US, to become the #1 and rule the world?
Well, I don't think that is probably the intention of China, because as far as you can see the history, Chinese for 5,000 years is always a continental country. It's an agriculture-based economy, and Confucius actually famous said, if your parents are alive, don't travel far away. So you see in the Ming Dynasty, the Marshal Zheng He actually 7-time expedition overseas, even as far as go to Africa. But they never stayed anywhere, leave any soldiers or colonize any places. So I think the DNA of China, in its culture, is always a continental country and stay with where their land are and never actually go too far. And also, I think China can be a great partner with U.S., EU, and the Global South. So I think, and also Chinese government, I think even Graham mentioned from Chairman Mao, Zhou Enlai, starting from 50 years ago until now. Their motto was always peaceful coexistence, mutual respect. I think now the modern technology, modern travel, online, digital, AI, probably they're going to group human beings together. We cannot separate. We think about the separation because of some human nature, still have that tendency, but the things we're doing together bond us together. We're living a really global small village now, and so that's probably the hope, that things we're doing will bond us together, and you can see how unpopular to wage a war now. But the war is happening in your living room. Everybody's watching it. It's not like old days that the war is happening far away. We don't know what's going on. People don't care about it. Now everybody is so even U.S. government now wants to have a ceasefire in Gaza now. Even they support Israel. So I think things starting to change. I agree with Graham. Maybe in 10, 15, 20, 30 years, we'll probably reach a new equilibrium. But fundamentally, we have to avoid a hot war. We have to avoid conflict. That's going to not to destroy the civilizations and destroy all the prosperity.
The U.S. has taken a decision, like as I mentioned earlier, to impose sanctions on Chinese companies or restrictions of export of certain technologies, certain products over there, and we see the security framework in Asia Pacific, for example, AUKUS and Quad, etc. What kind of competition we should have? In what way we can avoid the competition becoming, getting so fierce that it may veer into conflicts even?
I mean, actually, if you go back to Xi Jinping's early discussion of what was called a call for a new form of great power relations, I think his initial ideas, it wasn't very filled out, but it had a few pointers. So it's got to start with some mutual respect. So respect that you exist and I exist, and that's going to continue. So I always tell people, China was, China is, China will be. China's not going anywhere.
Yes.
And I would say same thing for the U.S. So there. So if we start from the proposition that a war would be so destructive of me and of you that we can't even ensure our own survival, then we have a powerful incentive to cooperate to prevent that. Well, how do wars happen? Sometimes they happen because one party wants a war, but sometimes they happen like World War I because there's a rivalry and then some incident or accident that's almost inconsequential happens. That becomes a spark. Spark becomes a fire. Fire becomes a conflagration. That's called World War I. So looking and seeing, as I tried to do in the Thucydides trap book, I have a chapter on World War I as one of the cases to see how does this dynamic work. So misperceptions, misunderstandings, miscalculations, misjudgments can often fuel a cycle that takes two parties that each know we do not want a war, but into an outcome that neither wanted. In fact, when I think about the risks of a war over Taiwan, I would say, how could that happen? I would say the same way the last war between the U.S. and China happened. Most Chinese don't even remember. So in 1950, the U.S. and China were in a full-scale war against each other.
Korean Peninsula.
In the Korean Peninsula. And how did this happen? Because China wanted a war with the U.S.? No. The U.S. wanted a war with China? No. The U.S. Unwittingly went across the 38th parallel, marching towards the Chinese border, could, inattention and misunderstandings and unwitting behavior on the part of one or the other lead to an outcome neither wanted in Taiwan. Well, I can give you 5 scenarios for that happening. And I think, fortunately, the two governments are now thinking about that and thinking, well, okay, if this happened, then that could happen. And if that happened, this could happen. So we need to understand this in advance. If we want a war, let's have a war. Of course, nobody wants a war. People say, that's insane. Well, so it's even more insane to have a war that you didn't want. So how do we prevent that? And that's why I think the framework that was and foundation laid at San Francisco, and then thick communication that's private, candid, talking about everything, being clear where we disagree, but also making it clear where misunderstandings could mislead us, where we don't really disagree. So U.S. and China agree, as the Shanghai Communique said, there is one China, not two Chinas, one China. U.S. and China agree Taiwan is not an independent country. That's okay. U.S. and China agree that the use of military force in the case of this to try to resolve the issue could get to an outcome neither one.
Dr. Wang, of course, the summit we mentioned between President Xi Jinping and President Biden, in San Francisco. They reached some consensus, obviously, and then it's about implementation. Not long ago, at the end of the two sessions, Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi complained about the lack of implementation of some of the agreements on the U.S. side. For example, for American citizens traveling to China, there's still this alert, a warning, don't travel to China probably, on the U.S. State Department. There's a lack of a willingness on either side to improve their relationship or to strengthen communication or have more new channels to talk to each other so as to avoid any misunderstanding or what's going on here?
Well, certainly, I think the more dialogues, and particularly, after the balloon, so-called spy balloon, never turned out to be the spy balloon, and then the U.S. calmed down, and then Blinken started to come, and Jack Sullivan started to meet, and then finally, we had this highlight of President Biden meet in San Francisco, which is great. I mean, that's where started some normal exchanges of secretaries, ministers, all the counterparts meeting. So we reached some stability now. But the problem you see is now, I think is a difference where Graham talked about China and U.S. Because U.S., you have opposition, you have a congressman, you have different parties. The White House is constrained. Even though they want to do something, they were not able to do it. So that's really, so I think a peaceful competition between China and the U.S. probably in the long run we'll see. Because China was a highly centralized government, the chain of command is very clear. If President Xi says something, the government says something, that's going to be implemented. If President Biden says something, there's a different balance and constraints, and then he couldn't probably deliver. So in the end, how the two systems going to work? We're now also seeing these two parties fighting ugly in the U.S., which is for the democracy of that style. I mean, U.S. is not a shining example, because it used to be everybody said this is the best model we could have, end of history now. But now, people start to look around global south to see, okay, how can we have a meritocracy? How can we have a consultative democracy? How can we build up a consensus? What about the cultural influence? What about education and all those? And also, don't forget, we're living in an international democracy. U.S. is the biggest opposition party of China, and probably vice versa. So you are watched by, different countries, UN, and so it's not just mountain is high and emperor is far away, is autocratic and doesn't know what to do, always makes silly decisions. No, I mean, China is well-informed, a lot of feasibility study and a lot of think tanks too. So I think that we'll have really see how these two systems peacefully coexist and compete, as Graham probably said, and then that's why I think the U.S. sometimes, because if they made the decision at the White House, but they worry about the opposition party, worry about the election, which is so China phobia, China worry, and then so they deliberately slow down things, and even President Biden said, okay, if you pass the bills on TikTok, I'm going to sign it. So he's really accommodating those anti-China feelings because of the system decides. It's the system that's different from China. So I think whether that system is still going to be perfect, we don't know. I mean, we'll see. This is a long-term, probably peaceful competition, and so takes 10, 20 years, 50 years, as Graham said, to find out how can we reach a new equilibrium, recognize each other. Okay, we are a diversified world, multipolar world. We have to live peacefully all together.
Well, look into the future. I want to have your suggestions, suggestions for the American side, suggestions for the Chinese side. What does it take for them to do, probably, to prevent, this is the worst part of going into conflict or war. Let's avoid that, at least we can probably, if we try enough, maybe we can do that. What they need to do now?
I think the foundation that President Xi and Biden laid at San Francisco is a stable foundation. I think building on it in a sustainable way is the challenge, and the implementation, as Henry mentioned. So I think that starts with more conversations between the two leaders, because that's what's important, to get the right impulse in both systems. And in one, the impulse is pretty well felt. The other is more complicated. And then trusted assistants also talking candidly, privately, regularly. So again, the meetings with of Wang Yi with both Jake Sullivan and with Tony Blinken at Munich is another such example. Private, candid, explicit, to make sure where there's risks, where there's misunderstandings. Then working groups that try to find areas where practical cooperation is possible, and also clarify where there's such differences we won't agree. So that's perfect. And at least making sure, again, to try to limit the misunderstandings, miscalculations, misjudgments, unintended consequences. So I think that's the way to build, and then kind of step by step. I think it's I don't know, the Chinese saying about crossing the river, sort of one stone at a time. I don't think that there's a, quote, solution there. I think that's a matter of some experimentation, but at the same time, remembering that however much our competitive juices are flowing, however much we want to be rivals, which we will, that our survival, the thing that without which the rest does not matter, depends on a substantial degree of cooperation with the other. And then dealing with that contradiction in our head and struggling with it. Don't imagine it's going to go away. Working on it steadily, but nonetheless managing it. Yeah.
I agree with Graham, actually, great ideas. I think now, fundamentally, as the world grow bigger, as we grow larger pie now, we're missing the trust now. That's probably fundamentally, we need to have the trust. I think right now they all think about rivalry, maybe competitions and things like that. But maybe we should also find a way to cooperate. So find some global project that is of common interest, like fighting climate change, like AI. How we can work to prevent future AI side effect, how to do the digital world, how to prevent pandemic. So for example, we all realize there's a big deficit on the global infrastructure. China proposed Belt and Road Initiative, U.S. proposed Build Back Better, B3W, EU proposed EU Global Gateway. Why can't we work together? So we need to find some common project, at least World Bank, which is headed by the Americans, AIB headed by the Chinese, ADB headed by the Japanese. They all share similar charters. Can they work together? Have a piece of chunk of doing a green finance or green infrastructure, or even U.S. and China, EU, talk about reconstruct, Ukraine and Gaza. If we work together with some common project, we build up some confidence and trust so that we can really talk. I agree, we have to talk at all levels. Student, tourism, people to people, travel, flights, dialogue. You can't avoid, miss any of those. So unless we do a whole society of approach, people to people, and particularly like opinion leader, thought like Graham, come to China and dialogue with all of us, we probably can build up some confidence in the future to have some healthy dialogue, so can avoid this kind of misunderstanding and mistrust, and then we can probably stabilize bilateral relations and multilateral relations.
Well, thank you, Professor. Thank you, Dr. Wang. With that, we come to the end for today's discussion. Many thanks to our guests. You can also find us on the CGTN app on YouTube. I'm Xu Qinduo. Thanks for being with us. See you next time.